Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Good evening, everybody. Center for Peace and Security Research is arranging a very pertinent topic webinar that regarding Afghan peace process prospects and pitfalls, likely impact on Pakistan. Today we have four worthy guest speakers who are really experienced campaigners and practitioners in diplomacy and international relations. Let me introduce our four worthy speakers. First of all, Mr. Shamshad Ahmed Khan is a veteran Pakistan Foreign Service officer who, besides several ambassadorial assignments, also held his country's top diplomatic position as Foreign Secretary during an extraordinary period of its history from 1997 to 2000. Mr. Shamshad Ahmed Khan served at many places, including South Korea and Iran, where he has been a Secretary General of Economic Cooperation Organization and as Pakistan's ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations. At professional level, he served in different posts at headquarters in Islamabad and in Pakistan missions at Tehran, Dakar, Paris, Washington, and New York. Currently, Mr. Shamshad Ahmed Khan heads a Lahore-based Lahore Center for Peace Research as its chairman. Welcome you, sir. Our second guest speaker is Mr. Asif Durrani, who has always been a former ambassador, who served as a former ambassador in UAE and Iran, and multiple other foreign assignments at Ministry of Foreign Affairs and abroad. He is an analyst par excellence and a prolific writer, writes for national dailies these days. Our third ambassador, Ayaz Wazir, Muhammad Ayaz Wazir. He is also from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and served in Pakistan's Foreign Service. He joined Foreign Service of Pakistan in 1974. He served the MOFA in Islamabad and Pakistan mission abroad at Vienna, Maputo, Dubai, Riyadh, Mazar-e-Sharif, London, Manchester, and Doha. So I welcome my fourth guest, Sayyid Abrar Hussain, who joined Foreign Service in 1983. He also served Pakistan as an ambassador in Nepal from 2008 to 2011 and in Kuwait from 2013 to 2014 and in Afghanistan from 2014 to 2017. He has been authoring 3 books, and one book I would like to mention here that recently published and very much relevant with our today's topic, that is Afghanistan, Mullah Umar Se Ashraf Ghani Tak. This book is published recently by IPS. So all 4 guests are very much capable in making us enlightened regarding the topic, Afghanistan peace process, prospects and pitfalls, likely impact on Pakistan. First of all, I invite Mr. Shamshad Ahmed Khan kindly enlighten us with the topic. Shamshad sir, if you could kindly unmute your mic, your mic is mute.
ठीक है, अब बताइए Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Sir, you can start. Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
तो आप ठीक है?
Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Pleasure. So, I was saying that you need to be complimented for getting together an unmatched reservoir of Afghan talent, because I've never seen before three of Pakistan's excellent diplomats, all experts in Afghanistan, attending an event at the same time.
Sir.
So I compliment you for doing this great feat, and we are all going to benefit from their experience, because in the first instance, I must admit that I'm not an Afghan expert, but I've dealt with Afghanistan from the early 90s till I retired. And even nowadays, I'm still engaged with Afghanistan, not as an issue, but as an imperative of peace. Now, coming back to your subject this afternoon, Afghan peace process, opportunities and pitfalls. Ajaz, I will begin with a quote from Quaid-e-Azam's foreign policy vision. He had given us a very clear direction on Pakistan's relations with its immediate neighbors. And he said, there is nothing that we desire more ardently than to live in peace and let others live in peace. We want to maintain cordial and friendly relations with our immediate neighbors. We have no aggressive designs against anyone. So this is what the Quaid-e-Azam had told us to pursue our policy in our neighborhood. And I may also recall here, Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, he also had something to say on relations with neighbors. In the conduct of foreign policy, he said, the benefits of cultivating good relations with countries in general can often be neutralized by a country's failure in relations with its neighbors. So in keeping with a clear direction from the Quaid, Pakistan has always sought good relations with its neighbors. But in foreign policy, good relations between any two countries, any two neighbors, are always predicated on mutual reciprocal policies. We could not change our geography, nor choose our neighbors, so we had to live in our geography and coexist with our neighbors. Despite, I won't go into the details, but I'll just briefly refer that despite Kabul's periodical unfriendly gestures, including its negative vote on its UN membership, Pakistan has not only provided uninterrupted transit facilities to its landlocked neighbor, but also over the decades stood by it in its long ordeals, including foreign-imposed wars. First, the Soviet occupation-led war, and then the US-led Afghan war. So in the process, no doubt, we have paid a huge price in multiple ways. This is a reality. All of us know that even Obama's Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, in 2009 had acknowledged in a congressional testimony, she accepted that the US had a share in creating the problem that now plagues Pakistan. That was in 2009. And she said, let us remember, the people we are fighting today were funded, we funded them 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in a struggle with the Soviet Union. So there is a very strong argument, she said, which is it wasn't a bad investment in terms of Soviet Union, but let's admit what we sow, we harvest. So, my dear friends, the genesis of the Afghan crisis is rooted in the chaos and conflict that engulfed this unfortunate country in the aftermath of the Soviet-Afghan war. And the fact remains that opportunities were missed in managing the Afghan imbroglio for good reasons as well as bad. So the world today would have been different if a country as chaotic and as primitive as Afghanistan, after Soviet withdrawal, had been treated with greater care and compassion and assisted in its gradual transition to global standards of conduct and behavior. But that never happened. Once the Soviets pulled out in 1989, the United States just walked away, leaving Afghanistan and its people at the mercy of their own fate. In other words, the Soviet withdrawal in the late 80s and early 90s brought no peace to Afghanistan. Instead, peace dividends went to the West as final victors in the Cold War. So the Berlin Wall collapsed, East Europe became free, democratic, and prosperous. But the Afghans remained in the same Stone Age, ready to fight perhaps not one war, maybe continuous wars. But that particular one war that they were ready to fight in the following years, that was the United States, which invaded their ill-fated country in the aftermath of 9/11. So the Afghans were not the only victims of the Afghan tragedy. Pakistan suffered more in terms of refugee influx, socio-economic burden, rampant terrorism, and protracted conflict in its border areas with Afghanistan. Yes, both Pakistan and Afghanistan are historically and physically part of a turbulent region which was globally important during the Cold War era and remains so even in today's changing environment. Both were in America's direct line of fire in the aftermath of the 9/11 tragedy. For whatever reasons or compulsions, a full-fledged war was fought on their soil. And after 19 years of a bloody conflict, we now hear the peace bells ringing again. And it was again with Pakistan's support and help that the United States reached an agreement with the Afghan Taliban at Doha in February this year. It was indeed a historic development, marking the first step in the right direction after a long time. The agreement signified what Pakistan had long been saying since the very beginning of the war, that Afghan peace will come only through a negotiated settlement. And this is what, incidentally, our present leadership also has been stressing from the very beginning. Imran Khan is known to have taken this position for the last 2 decades or so. So peace in Afghanistan is long overdue, but peace, as we know by now, and I keep repeating this reality, peace as we know by now is much more than mere absence of war or withdrawal of foreign troops. Peace today has come to mean more than military conflict between states and nations. It means peace and harmony within nations. It is this peace that Afghanistan, a country divided on ethnic and linguistic grounds, badly needs today. The Doha Agreement involves four basic elements to be addressed as part of the US-Taliban understanding. These include temporary ceasefire, withdrawal of foreign forces within a stipulated period, the talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government, and assurances that the Taliban will not participate in or aid others in threatening the security of the US and its allies. Well, there have been pitfalls right from the beginning, but the Loya Jirgal subsequently tried to solve those problems, and I think the peace process is back on its track, although still there are quite a few problems. The fact that the United States and the Afghan Taliban, after 18 months of protracted dialogue, have solemnly agreed on these benchmarks is in itself reason for optimism over the prospect of Afghan peace. But there are forces in the region. When we talk of pitfalls, so this is the biggest pitfall. The forces within the region which are inimical to any genuine peace in Afghanistan and have been seeking to scuttle the process from the very beginning. So Afghans must understand that their country is in a mess not because of Pakistan. It is in a mess because of many other reasons that they know very well. Pakistan's Afghan policy is based on non-interference in the internal affairs of Afghanistan and strict neutrality vis-a-vis the Afghan ethnic factions. So if anything, we have always sought to promote a broad-based, multi-ethnic dispensation in Afghanistan. And we remain steadfast in these efforts. So it is in Pakistan's interest to have an independent, friendly, and my colleagues here, the three distinguished ambassadors, they know more than anybody else that it is in Pakistan's interest to have an independent, friendly, and united Afghanistan, free of foreign control or influence. In the ultimate analysis, however, the onus for Afghan peace now rests with the Afghans themselves, and they alone are the final arbiters of their future. So they must come together to stitch themselves into a strong fabric of one Afghan nation. The Doha Agreement gives them an opening. They must grab it as a momentous opportunity to move in the direction of a multi-ethnic, peaceful settlement in Afghanistan. They must rise above all factional considerations and join together in building solid foundations of peace in their country. What they now need is a determined effort, including all stakeholders in an equitable and a broad-based peace process based on mutual respect and reconciliation, reflecting the aspirations of freedom and justice for the Afghan people, regardless of their ethnic, lingual, and religious backgrounds. So we are their well-wishers here. We are only interested in their peaceful transition as an independent, sovereign, and united Afghanistan. But with many imponderables on the very nature of the stipulated Afghan endgame, an ominous uncertainty still looms large on the Afghan plan. To secure a stable, united, and independent Afghanistan, there is a need for sharp focus on Afghanistan's economic and social development, including trans-regional development and counter-terrorism measures. Of course, there is one reality that one has to admit, and that is the Afghan government will also have to reset its functional mode and improve the country's governance, limit corruption, augment the rule of law to sustain Afghan public support for any peace or political process. So they must not allow their country to be used against third countries and all neighboring. To conclude, I'll say that all neighboring and regional countries must respect the principles of non-interference and non-intervention and refrain from using the Afghan soil for destabilizing activities in third countries. The regional rivalries, as we all know, can easily stoke the fires of conflict. And my three worthy colleagues have seen these fires in Afghanistan. And Ayaz Wazir used to visit Afghanistan with my two other distinguished colleagues, late Iftikhar Murshid and Aziz Khan. So they know very well the realities.
Thank you very much, sir, for your time. Really, it's very much that you have been to stick to your 15 minutes. So I suppose that all three guests would also be very much, particular with the time. So I invite now Asif Durrani, who has been, a former ambassador of Pakistan. Sir, please enlighten us with your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rana Ijaz, for giving me the opportunity to speak on a very important topic. And I must congratulate Center for Peace and Security Research for organizing this very important webinar. We all know we are grappling with this problem of Afghanistan for the past 4 decades. So we know how these problems have emerged. In fact, it has become now a part of our daily vocabulary that we have to deal with Afghanistan, and there's a symbiotic relationship. So we should not forget that while we talk about Afghanistan, politically it is a sovereign country, but in terms of socially, culturally, and economically, it is almost a part of Pakistan, not in the political sense, but in the cultural, socio-cultural sense. You can see that now that there's a problem of COVID-19, so the flow of people has come down, but normally 50 to 60,000 Afghans straddle the Pakistani border every day without documents. So this is a kind of an arrangement which has been, in fact, there in vogue for the past many centuries. Almost 80% of Afghanistan's trade transits through Pakistan. Then we still have Afghan refugees, almost close to 3 million, out of which 1.7 million are registered with the UNHCR. Then we also know that Afghanistan has passed through different phases, at least in the past 4 decades. And in that respect, we have been the direct affected party, while Afghanistan has other neighbors. But the uniqueness between Pakistan and Afghanistan is that Afghanistan does not have access to any of its neighbors like it has with Pakistan. Certainly Iran or Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and China don't allow Afghans the kind of access which Pakistan allows. Afghanistan's secondary and tertiary health requirements are fulfilled by Pakistan. There are almost 30,000 Afghan students who are studying in Pakistani colleges and universities. Even now, despite the fact that India has offered liberal scholarships, invariably, those youth, boys and girls who are sitting behind computers in Kabul or elsewhere in the Afghan centers, city centers or towns, they have invariably got education from Pakistan. There's a symbiotic relationship, when I say, is because despite the fact that there may be certain political expediencies which may perhaps force Afghan leaders or factional leaders to talk against Pakistan. But it is also a fact that perhaps their families are still living in Pakistan. Their children are still studying in Pakistan. So having said that, now coming to Afghanistan itself, we all know what has happened on 29th February between Taliban and the Americans. Now again, it is politics, and it makes strange bedfellows, as the saying goes. So yesterday's terrorists, Taliban, became interlocutors with the United States. This is Taliban are still under the 1267 committee sanctions, which is now called 1988 committee. There are still Taliban who are to be taken to account, but it is also a fact of life that the same Taliban and their top leadership are holding negotiations. They have been holding negotiations with the Americans. They have been traveling to the neighbors of Afghanistan. They have come to Pakistan, they have traveled to Iran, they have traveled to Russia and China. And now the new paradigm which is emerging through all this situation is that after the February agreement, it is now paving way for an intra-Afghan dialogue. Now it's a very big step. This step, but at the same time, there are certain pitfalls. When we talk about the prospects of Afghan peace, so that prospects have started on 29th February when America signed agreement with the Taliban. But at the same time, there was a glitch, and glitch was regarding concerning release of our exchange of prisoners between Taliban and the Ashraf Ghani government. It almost took 5 months. Some say that it was a delaying tactics on the part of President Ashraf Ghani, so that the President Trump, who is seeking re-election and he wants to see a peaceful Afghanistan or withdrawal of American troops as a big plus for his election campaign, he can then claim that he brought the boys back home. He can claim that he will save $50 billion per annum. It's financial liabilities in Afghanistan because of the war. He can say that we could not win the war, that's why he had to end the war, and then he had to save his soldiers' lives. So there are many, you can say, prospects from the American point of view, and there are many prospects from Afghanistan point of view. But at the same time, when President Ashraf Ghani is probably is the least happy man in this whole scenario. Initially, and from the beginning, when this dialogue was being held between America and the Taliban, the President Ghani's government, they were not happy. Reason was because they felt left out from this whole dialogue process. And when this agreement was signed on 29th February, it proved to be so because the guarantees which Americans gave regarding the exchange of prisoners was to the Taliban. It was not coming through President Ashraf Ghani. That's why he objected to this agreement and he objected to the release of prisoners. Now that is almost behind us, and again, American role was very much there, and it persuaded Ashraf Ghani government to release those prisoners. Now, where do we stand now? That is a big question when we talk about prospects and pitfalls. Prospects I have just narrated, but pitfalls are that this intra-Afghan dialogue would be about sharing power in the future. Now, here lies the catch, and it is that Taliban are the dominating party. They physically control 50% of the country, and they contest another 20% of the country's territory. So in a way, they control almost 70%. In that scenario, expecting Taliban to be the junior partner, any political scientist, I think he is going to disagree. So when you talk about the pitfalls, then the pitfalls would start with the issue of sharing of power, and that one can anticipate. So it would be upon the sagacity of the Afghan leadership that how they grapple with this gigantic question, this huge question, that how to address that. Then secondly, when we talk about the pitfalls, then immediately comes the role of spoilers. Because spoilers would be, for spoilers, a peace in Afghanistan would mean they have to wind up their business. A peace in Afghanistan would mean that they will have to wind up the business of drugs, and it would mean that the drug lords will have to wind up their business. A peace in Afghanistan would mean that the warlords who have been so far playing the role of a rent seeker, they'll have to wind up that business. And then their external supporters which have been using Afghanistan soil especially against Pakistan. I mean, India using Afghanistan soil against Pakistan, that would mean that they'll have to wind up. So these are the pitfalls for the spoilers. But again, these are the pitfalls for those who are suing for peace. And one should not expect that those who are benefiting from the war economy are going to sue for the peace in Afghanistan anytime soon, unless there is complete peace. Then I must also say that here Taliban trying to be the major stakeholder, they are still now, I mean, they have started behaving like going to be the government in waiting. I'm saying this because to some of the minorities, especially religious minorities, they are asking their leaders to owe their allegiance on Mullah Haftunlah Akhund. They should offer their back to Mullah Akhund. So if this is the situation, then in that case, I don't think that there'll be a smooth sailing once intra-Afghan dialogue culminates. So there are big dangers. So one has to be very careful. Again, at the same time, we can talk about there will be pitfalls with regard to existing system of governance in Afghanistan. Right now, it is a presidential form of government, but it is actually a cut and paste because while a president can be elected for 2 terms, that is the American system, but at the same time, this president is elected on the basis, on non-party basis. Afghanistan's even Wulasi Jirga lower houses elections are held on non-party basis, while there are over 70 political parties in Afghanistan. It means what? It means that the political process, which needs stability and political process comes through the political parties, those are not strong enough. I admit that our Afghan friends are telling us that none of the political parties can garner more than 20 seats in Afghan Wulasi Jirga, and same is true about their presidential elections. But when you look at the presidential elections, look at what has been the pattern. Mr. Hamid Karzai, he got himself elected through, of course, adult franchise, but he was paratrooped by the Americans. Same happened with Mr. Ashraf Ghani. He never ran a 2-man office in his life, but all of a sudden he became a political leader. And now it is the second term, which is again a questionable because of the results. And out of 9 million voters, only 1 million voters, they cast their vote and he got himself elected. So if that is the situation, we will not find fault with the problem, with the system, reason being that it is still alien to the Afghan system. It's tribal system. It's a political system which has been followed. It has been a monarchy, and all of a sudden it turned into a so-called a socialist political system. It was a coup d'etat come so-called revolution. You can use all the adjectives in the political science, but that all failed. Reason was Afghanistan was a tribal society.
So what do you think, sir? What is the likely impact on Pakistan? That is the last portion of your.
Yeah, I know. I'm just coming to that. I'm coming to that. The likely impact is that if there is anarchy, there'll be influx of more refugees, and it means then we will have to gear up. And right now, our economy it's difficult to sustain country's own problems, but to talk of sustaining the people coming from Afghanistan. Then another problem we will be facing, and in case there is no agreement between the parties, then in that case we have to be prepared for in the neighborhood, especially with regard to Taliban and other factions. So you will have the same situation which we faced when the Taliban were ruling. And then there'll be question of international support. So international support was divided when Taliban were ruling. There were only 3 countries which were recognizing Taliban. That is not going to happen anytime soon in this regard. But at the same time, there are chances that since Americans have entered into an agreement with the Taliban, they would be happy if Taliban can bring peace to Afghanistan. Now, there'll be this statement can be debated, and there could be arguments for and against that, but that is there. But at the same time, if peace returns to Afghanistan, there are dividends, and dividends for both for implications for Pakistan are positive. That is CPAC is a project which can extend to Afghanistan and onwards to Central Asia, and then its linkages to BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. Then we can also see that there could be, we have to be geared up for the ISIS threat, Daesh threat in Afghanistan, which is there, and which is an existential threat, and we have to gear for that as well. Because in case of anarchy, it could be anybody's game, and then we have to be prepared.
Thank you very much, sir, for your really enlightening.
I'll a couple of sentences, then I can.
Sure, sir. Sure, please.
I'll finish. There's a need for involvement of the international actors for the sustenance of Afghanistan's future dispensation, and that would come through their financial and economic aid. Because if that is not available, then you should expect all kinds of problems, troubles, and anarchies in Afghanistan. If that was the case during the Taliban's time and before, and that was the case which made Afghanistan a narco state, and that narco state is destabilizing the entire region. It is like Colombia, which is fighting for that for the past 4 decades. So this is what we have to look at the pitfalls, which from Pakistan's point of view would not be good. I thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your very apt talk, sir. Now I invite our third speaker, Muhammad Ayaz Wazir Saab, and please, sir, enlighten us with your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Saab. I would like to thank you and the other organizers for inviting me to today's webinar to speak on the Afghan peace process, prospect and pitfalls, likely impact on Pakistan. I would also like to avail this opportunity to pay my respect and compliments to my co-panelists, to Ambassador Shamshad Ahmad Khan Saab, our former Foreign Secretary, Asif Durrani Saab, Ibrar Hussain Saab. Well, the subject, as you know, is so vast and so important that it's almost impossible to do justice with it in this short time. But I'll try to touch upon the most important aspect of it in this in these few minutes that we have. So I'll begin with the peace process in Afghanistan. This subject is not new to Afghanistan, like war is not new to Afghanistan. War and peace go together side by side. We will not go into the past, let's go to the recent past and then focus on the present. We saw the Soviet Union walked in, followed by the Geneva Accord, providing face saving to the Soviets to go out. Then the Mujahideen walked into Afghanistan, but it's so unfortunate that they didn't respect the agreements that they reached to between themselves. And then Afghanistan, we know what happened to it. Then followed the Taliban and Northern Alliance. Efforts were made to bring them closer. And when we were about to really bring them closer and make the top leadership meet, that so unfortunately took place in our country, and the Prime Minister who initiated this process, of which Shamshad Ahmad Khan Saab made a mention that he and Iftikhar Murshid and Aziz Ahmad Khan, we did shuttle diplomacy between Northern Alliance and the Taliban. Believe you me, we brought them so close that Ahmad Shah Massoud agreed to serve under Mullah Omar. The agreement was reached. We flew from Dushanbe straight to Kandahar to consult Mullah Omar and request him, and he agreed also. After a long discussion, he agreed, and we decided that our next meeting of the two will take place in Dushanbe. But then, as I said, it's so unfortunate. The process was derailed by a coup in Pakistan, and it came to a grinding halt without any agreement between them. Then came in the American invasion of Afghanistan, bringing the Northern Alliance, the opponent of the Taliban, into power in Afghanistan, with a slight difference of Hamid Karzai as a Pashtun leader from Kandahar as its president. The rest were all warlords of the Northern Alliance. Then the American, for quite some time, were not prepared to listen to the name of the Taliban, leave alone talking to them. That reminds me of a small talk that we had here at my home. An ambassador from a very important country, let's leave the country. When we were discussing Afghanistan, I suggested, I'll quickly mention, I suggested to him that, well, you have to talk to the Taliban. There is no way that you can find a solution through peaceful means. This we were talking somewhere, I think, 2009 and 11, somewhere in between. He said to me, these are his words. He says, Mr. Wazir, you have poured a bucket of cold water over my head. And then when he said so, I said, well, Excellency, I am keeping the icy bucket for our next meeting. I wish I see him now, that after some time, they were not only prepared to talk to the Taliban, and for that, a person like President Trump, who is known for using every bad word for Pakistan, requested Prime Minister Imran Khan to do something to convince the Taliban to come for negotiation. The two efforts that were made at Murray and then the second time under QCG umbrella to bring the Afghan government and Taliban, or the American and the two together to find a solution, were scuttled by the announcements of Mullah Omar's death from Kabul, the first one, and the second one when Mullah Mansour was killed in a drone strike in Balochistan. Thereafter, then they kept quiet for a while, but in 2018, we see Zalmay Khalilzad, the American point man, shuttling up and down in the region and outside, trying to find some sort of an agreement between the US and the Taliban. And finally, as my colleagues mentioned, an agreement between them after a long time, I think it took a year or a little more. It was signed in Doha on February 29. And under that, as Ambassador Shamshad Ahmad said, the agreement, first one was that the American troops will leave Afghanistan by May 2021. They will all leave. And the Taliban undertook that they will not permit the Afghan soil to be used against America or any other country, and will not attack the American forces when they are in the process of leaving that country. And the other important clause of that agreement was, though the Afghan government was not in the talks there, but the agreement the American made on behalf of the Afghan government, that the 5,000 prisoners of Taliban with the Afghan government and the 1,000 Taliban prisoner of the Afghan government with the Taliban will be released immediately, and the intra-Afghan talks will take place on March 10. The Taliban did, they released. The other side, unfortunately, delayed it on one pretext or another. And till the loyal Jirga came to the rescue, gave the authority or say made a face saving for President Ashraf Ghani to release the remaining prisoners. But even despite the fact that the loyal Jirga decided and Ashraf Ghani also signed an order of release, 6 prisoners were kept, which are still with the Afghan government. But meanwhile, the Taliban team came here, had a meeting with our authorities. Prime Minister Imran Khan had a telephonic conversation with Abdullah. So they somehow, it seems, came to an agreement that we will go ahead with the intra-Afghan dialogue. And as far I understand, the two agreed that the 6 prisoners, the Taliban 6 prisoners with the Afghan government, they will be brought to Doha and the negotiation will begin, and then some way out will be, say, somehow found to release or do something about it. Now, after that, the Taliban team left for Doha. They are there. The only change is in the leadership. Now it is Abdul Hakim, who is their leader of the team, who is a very close confidant of the Taliban Amir, Haibatullah Khunzada. So Abdul Hakim will be leading, and that team is including 16 members from the Markazi Shura of the Taliban, which is the final authority on the Taliban movement. So in other words, the Taliban team is very powerful. They have the power to decide matters right on the spot without going back to the leadership. Whereas when we look at the Afghan team, which still I believe is in Kabul, they have not gone. Some technicalities I think are worked out in Doha, like for example, how the flags would be placed and who would speak first or whatever. The protocol and the necessary requirement, I think, are worked out. And once they sorted out, the Afghan government team will come. But the 21-member team, the interesting thing is in the Afghan team. One, it is comprising of very young people. It includes 5 women and sons of the warlords, like Rashid Dostam's son is there, and Atanur's son is there, and Muhakkik's son, I believe, is there. So some Afghan senior analysts have criticized it, that it's not a representative of the Afghan population, but a representative of the warlords. Anyway, whatever, if the 21-member team, they go to Doha, then I think the process of negotiation will begin, which I believe is the most difficult, as my friend Asif Durrani Saab said, is the most difficult part. The first part, the Taliban and America dialogue was not that difficult, but we see that it took more than a year to come to some sort of an agreement. The real task lies for this team when they meet, because they are deciding the future government, the future, everything about Afghanistan. One team feels as if we are coming as a conqueror, or as if we are Fateh ki haysiyat se hum aa rahe hain, so we must have the lion's share. Whereas the other one says that we are a recognized government, recognized by every country almost. So we are the representative of Afghanistan. But anyway, when they enter into the dialogue, they'll have to make the decision But the important thing, which I missed, I recall now, I wanted to mention it. When the Afghan team was announced, then Abdullah was given the position of a chairman of the High Council for National Reconciliation, and it was announced that he'll be the one who will be making a decision on this negotiation with the Taliban. But then what happened that Ashraf Ghani nominated 40 members to the High Council for National Reconciliation and authorized that or empowered that to oversee the process of negotiation with the Taliban. That means to me that it is cutting Abdullah to his size. Like it will not be him, it will be these 40 members. Well, one important member of that was Hamid Karzai, who declined to be a member of the High Peace Council. He said, I have nothing to do with that. But anyway, the president's decision still remains, as he said. Abdullah has strongly reacted to it, but he has not boycotted or refused anything. So the question mark is still there. Is he going to make a final decision? Will he be the decision maker? Or through the 40 members, Ashraf Ghani will be a decision maker? That we have yet to see.
Thank you, sir.
Sir?
Sir, thank you very much for your talk, sir. Can you finish in a couple of minutes?
If you permit me, I'll quickly mention the impact on Pakistan and the pitfalls.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. Please.
Well, the prospect of success, I would say, are very bright, but they depends on the leadership of the two sides. They have to come out of their personal liking and disliking. They have to make decisions for the Afghan country and Afghan nation, not for themselves, because we have seen the Northern Alliance or the Afghan government, the people over there, are always hunting for personal positions. So they have to come out of it and make an agreement with the Taliban. The two sides have really to make an agreement acceptable to everyone. If the Taliban wants to be in the driving seat, the other side is not going to accept. If the other side wants to be in the driving seat, the Taliban are not accepting it. So it is to be some arrangement which is acceptable to everyone. So the chances are there for success, but at the same time, the chances of failure are equally as big or as bright, if I may use the word for it, as for the pieces, because we have seen it is the reverse of the position of 90. Then Taliban were in position. Now the Northern Alliance, in a different way, are in a position with American support. So that is there, and the impact on Pakistan, I'll quickly mention that as we have seen that whatever the situation in Afghanistan, that certainly impacts on Pakistan. If there is peace, we are in peace. If there is instability, we have seen for the last so many years what happened to our country. More than 80,000 shuhada we gave. Fata was burning, KP was on fire, the whole country was having bomb blasts here and there. So with peace in Afghanistan, we certainly will have not only peace in our country, but a big prospect of expansion of our trade and economic relation. Mind it that Afghanistan was one of the 5 major countries of your export when it was a little better, the situation. Now it is a different way. But if peace returns, Afghanistan is peaceful, it will not only be expansion of trade with Afghanistan, import and export, it will go beyond. CPEC is there, and the whole world is before you if peace returns. But if not, then it's extremely difficult. So let's cross our fingers and pray that this time peace returns to Pakistan. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'm not going to I'm not going to say, but I have to say that it will not be like what happened in 90s. This time it will be much, much more disastrous and catastrophic. So let's hope that doesn't happen and peace is done.
Thank you very much, sir, for your elaborated talk. Now I invite our fourth guest speaker, Syed Abrar Hussain. Sir, please enlighten us with your talk. Thank you. Sir, can you unmute your mic? Sir, your mic is muted. Can you unmute your mic, sir? Sir, your mic is still mute. हम यहाँ से खोल सकते हैं इसको?
Yes, now it's unmute.
Oh, it's okay. Yes, it's working now, sir.
Hear me? Yes, Professor Ejaz, thank you so much.
Welcome, sir.
I'm also grateful to Center for Peace and Security Research for organizing this webinar. And in the very beginning, let me convey my salam and regards to Muhtaram Shamshad Sahab, Mr. Ayaz Wazir, and Mr. Asif Durrani also. Well, in fact, the topic has already been covered so comprehensively that whatever I say would be overlapping or a bit of repetition. Ambassador Shamshad Sahab has given the background of bilateral relations with Afghanistan and the history of the whole process. Then Mr. Durrani has covered it all, and Mr. Ayaz Wazir very ably told you about the peace efforts since 1999 onwards, where he was also involved. Well, in fact, this peace process talks to QCG, to Moscow format, to Kabul process, dozens of efforts failed to bring peace to Afghanistan. Finally, the optimism stemmed from this landmark Doha peace deal between the US and the Taliban, as mentioned earlier, which was on 29th of February this year. However, there remain formidable challenges in the implementation process of this agreement. According to this deal, the intra-Afghan dialogue was to begin on 10th March, and prisoners from both sides were to be released. However, neither release of all prisoners nor intra-Afghan dialogue could take place for the next 6 months. This delay was apparently due to a number of factors. First of all was the unwillingness of the Afghan government to release Taliban prisoners, and then subsequent pressure from some Western countries for this purpose, as mentioned by Ambassador Ayaz Wazir. And finally, now this issue has been resolved. And the second factor was unpreparedness on part of the Afghan government to form an inclusive team to talk to Taliban, which was very important, and it took almost 6 months. And then, of course, the rift between Ghani and Abdullah and the differences in Kabul about the results of elections and so many other things. But now, when all these problems seem to have been solved and intra-Afghan talks are expected to be held in Doha soon, it's at this stage that substantial issues will be discussed. So now,
Abrasab, your mic is again mute. Please, can you please unmute it?
yes,
Thank
I think
you. It's done.
now.
Now it's working. Yeah.
Yes, I was saying that now it's time when the real issues are going to be discussed. And the major issue is agenda of talks. According to the agreement, the Doha deal, the agenda talks will include a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire, which means date, modalities, joint implementation mechanism, and so on. And then agreement over the future political roadmap of Afghanistan, which is very important. At this stage, the Taliban may ask to form a new constitution, or at least suggest some major changes in the current Afghan constitution. They may also seek major share in government, and the other side may want to retain the democratic institutions established after 9/11 and seek guarantees about human rights, women's rights, right to education, etc. The Taliban claim to have changed and have assured their interlocutors at different meetings about their respect for women's rights in accordance with Islam. Well, I remember that in 2016, a meeting was organized between Taliban representatives and Afghan women activists such as Shukriya Barakzai and Fawzia Kufi in Oslo. And in this meeting, they had assured these women activists that they are changed now, they have seen the now, and they would respect women's rights. But still their opponents don't believe them and say that the Taliban have a different interpretation of Islam, which is not generally acceptable. Now, another major challenge can be, as mentioned by Mr. Asif Durrani, spoilers. And who are spoilers? All those elements who don't want peace in Afghanistan for one reason or another. For example, those who benefit from war economy, those who have established their fiefdoms, those who use Afghan soil against Pakistan, those who can't rule Afghanistan without foreign support, and so on. So all these can be spoilers. Well, then there can be yet another problem. For example, if the amendment in the constitutions are discussed, there could be differences not only between the two negotiating teams, but among the members of the government negotiating team itself, because they would be from different ethnic backgrounds, from different ideological groups. For example, all those non-Pashtun groups in Afghanistan would like to have a parliamentary system where they can also rule Afghanistan as head of the government or head of the state. But the Pashtun groups would like only a presidential system. So these kind of differences can also come up. Well, now the success of the intra-Afghan dialogue totally depends on sincerity from both sides. The Taliban have to be careful and not to show any brinksmanship. Afghan government also needs to look beyond its tenure for long-term peace in Afghanistan. The US, of course, has a responsibility of steering this process. As far as impact on Pakistan is concerned, we all know that peace in Afghanistan is a win-win situation, but God forbid, any failure of peace talks can lead to a civil war in Afghanistan, which its neighbors can ill afford. It means if there is a civil war, that would mean more refugees, that would mean violence on our borders, as mentioned by Ambassador Ayaz Wazir. And we know violence on border means its effects inside our borders. It means no economic activity with Afghanistan and beyond with Central Asia. And also it means, as mentioned earlier, no regional projects like CASA and TAPI or extension of CPAC. So Pakistan should therefore facilitate the Afghan peace process as much as possible. But at the same time, we should avoid meddling in the Afghan affairs. We shouldn't become party to their local conflicts. Let the Afghans talk to each other and solve their problems in accordance with their own traditions. If we are asked by them at any stage to help, only then we should come forward and extend a helping hand. But if we are not asked to do so, then We should let them resolve their issues themselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your really in time given talk that is really very short, brief, but comprehensive. So I really appreciate for our speakers, and I'm really feeling obliged the way all the guest speakers enlightened us on a very germane issue. Let's now we go towards immediately our question answer session. First of all, that I have a question from Muzaffar Rizvi, who is a business editor in Khalij Times, Dubai. He's asking that what would be the impact of Afghan peace process on CPEC and New World Order in general? Can you predict time frame for Afghan peace process deal, please? Anyone can start, please. I would request first of all Shamshad Sahab if he could answer this question. Sir, please unmute your mic first.
Okay. ठीक हो गया? Can you hear me? अब आपका खामोश है.
Yes, sir, I can hear you. Thank you, sir.
Hear me all right.
Thank you.
It's an interesting question. The Afghan peace obviously has effect on every evolving situation in the region. In fact, I am familiar with a process of regional cooperation that we started in early 90s, and we had finalized many blueprints of roads, railway lines, and oil and gas pipelines, but no blueprint has been implemented because of the continued Afghan turmoil. So obviously Afghan peace is crucial for any project. However, China-Pakistan economic corridor is in its essence has its various dimensions. It's basically linking China's western part with Gwadar and other sea lanes, and the road links with West Asia and beyond. So Afghanistan situation will be helpful if we can wrap up the peace process. But on the other hand, it is CPEC which can facilitate the process of peace in Afghanistan. So what is more important is that China-Pakistan represent the only equation, the only relationship from within the region which can jointly convert the Pakistan-Afghanistan border into a gateway, economic gateway to Central Asia. So I think it is CPEC which is going to help the Afghan process. And I think the Chinese already realized this. So they have joined this process. So we should be hopeful. So I want to make one thing clear, that we have now reviewed the whole scenario, the Afghanistan crisis and the prospects and pitfalls. What is clear is that there is no alternative to peace. And the alternative to peace is what Abrar has just now mentioned. It will be a civil war, regional instability, and more seriously, the possibility of an India-Pakistan conflict. Not only on Kashmir, there is another scenario, and here in Afghanistan, because India's presence in Afghanistan is no less a threat than to what the Soviet presence in the backyard of the United States was a threat to America's interests in the 60s, which almost triggered a global nuclear conflict. So we have to keep in mind all these things, and we should be hopeful that this time, now or never, the Afghans have, I think, come to realize that this is the last time that they have got an opportunity. Thank you.
Well, our second question is from Dr. Usman Askri, who is an assistant professor in the University of Management Technology, Lahore campus. He is asking that what we learn from the history of United States involvement in different countries. It left bloodshed, violence, and civil war in every country. Are we going to have same kind of scenario, the US withdrawal? If yes, then what would be the policy options for Pakistan? I request to Mr. Asif Durrani, if he could unmute his mic and would like to answer this question.
Yeah, I thank you, Dr. Askari, for asking this question.
Ejaz, sir.
No, the question is asked by
Yes.
Dr.
You are right,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah, so I think it's an important question because once US troops withdraw, we should not forget that American troops in Afghanistan were not as a result of an attack. It was as a result of UN authorization under Chapter 7, Resolution 1373. We do not make a distinction. Here in our analysis, we call it US invasion of Afghanistan. I think it's a wrong statement because America was authorized, and it was just not the United States, but all NATO states were part of it. Whether good or bad, whether we like it or not, but Americans came here under the authorization of the UN Security Council resolutions. And secondly, when America withdraws, naturally they have been supporting Afghan governments financially, almost $5 to $6 billion by sustaining their armed forces, and then also contributing another couple of $1 billion to the Afghan government's budget. What would be the fate of that assistance, economic assistance, financial assistance, is yet to be seen because it's not clear. And I think America would make it conditional. It could be, various conditions, including maintaining certain bases in Afghanistan, or maybe the peace in Afghanistan. So that is important. What is the second part of his question?
Sir, he was asking about that, how we can say that, are we going to have same kind of scenario after the US withdrawal?
Yeah, no, policy options for Pakistan. Here, I talked about policy options for Pakistan. Well, I think we have been the victim of whatever happened in Afghanistan. There was a fallout on Pakistan. So if Afghanistan is sustained economically, then I think there'll be positive changes. And economic sustenance of Afghanistan means that peace would return to Afghanistan. If there's no peace, then forget about economic activity taking roots in that country. So for us, I think we should wish that a peaceful Afghanistan is actually a guarantee for the stability of not only Afghanistan, but also for Pakistan. Yes, please.
And the third question is from Rida Sharafat from Azad Kashmir. She's asking that what is way forward for Afghans in intra-Afghan rapprochement? Do Afghan needs a new social and political contact? I would request Muhammad Ayaz, if he would like to answer the question. Please unmute your mic, sir, please.
Well, sir, I think I've mentioned a bit in my presentation that the way forward for Afghans is to both sides to make sacrifices and come to an agreement under which they can make a government which is acceptable to all Afghans, to the Taliban side and to the Afghan government side. Because Afghans generally are sick and tired of this war, this destruction that is going in their country. Both sides are tired. Taliban are as tired as the other side is tired. The question is that, well, those who are making them fight, they have, in Afghanistan, there are so many people and countries that they have interest inside Afghanistan. If they want to come to an agreement, there would be spoilers, as was already mentioned. Spoilers internally and externally would try to bring instability back. that the Afghans also are aware of. That's why the recent terror incident in Kabul, or the attack on Amrullah Saleh just yesterday, has not derailed the process, because they know people would do these kind of things and try to derail it. But their effort would be to find a solution, and the solution or the way forward, in my assessment, lies in nothing but in sacrifices on both sides of the political divide, the leadership of both sides, to make decisions keeping in view the interest of the country, the interest of the Afghan nation.
Our next question is from Mr. Farhan Sher. Can Pakistan survive a second civil war in Afghanistan, and what are the steps it should take in such a scenario? I would request Mr. Abrar, if you would like to answer this question. Please unmute your mic, sir.
Okay, I think I've already mentioned it in my talk as well, that Pakistan and even other neighbors can ill afford any civil war in Afghanistan. If there is a civil war, of course, we would suffer. We always say that if there's war in Afghanistan, Pakistan would be the first country outside Afghanistan which suffers most. And similarly, if there is peace in Afghanistan, Pakistan would be the first one to gain most after Afghanistan. And then Afghanistan, of course, is the heart of Asia. The whole Asia, and especially the immediate region, has to be affected from whatever happens in Afghanistan. And as I mentioned, if there is a civil war in Afghanistan, we would suffer more than its other neighbors. Like Central Asians may not suffer that much as Pakistan would suffer, because Pakistan will have to face violence on its border. Pakistan will have to face more refugees maybe coming from Afghanistan, and what to talk of return of these refugees who are already in Pakistan. And then, of course, all the economic links with Afghanistan, our trade, bilateral trade with Afghanistan, our trade with Central Asia, and all the regional economic projects like CASA and TAPI and CPEC, of course, which is going to be extended to Afghanistan. So all these will suffer. So we will suffer politically, economically, and also from the security angle. That's why I think it's in our best interest that we should facilitate Afghan peace as much as possible. And just one bottom line, which I always keep on saying, that even if there is an unfriendly government in Kabul, and we have a preference between an unfriendly government in Kabul and peace in Afghanistan, we should prefer peace. Of course, if we can have both, why not? But if there is a choice, we should choose peace and not the friendly government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Our next question is from Mr. Riaz. He is asking that in case of a successful intra-Afghan deal, do you think Taliban will be able to form a government in Afghanistan? I would again request Mr. Shamshad Ahmad Khan Sahib, if you would like to answer this question.
Sure. That will depend a good deal on what kind of system they all agree upon, whether it is going to be what kind of presidential system they'll have. So, but given the fact that we all know that Taliban do have a majority, so I think they would have a predominant role in any political dispensation in future Afghanistan. So at the same time, I'm optimistic that this intra-Afghan process will, this time, will certainly make progress. Well, unless there are very serious pitfalls. Otherwise, the Afghans also are now fully aware of the reality that it is now or never.
There is another question. I can't have his name, unfortunately, because there is only phone that's showing the title. So the question is, does China has any kind of leverage over Afghan leadership that make the latter obliged to join hand with the Taliban to forward the peace process? And will the Ghanis government that is under Indian influence listen to China for the peace of region and for the sake of CPEC success? I would request again Mr. Asif Durrani, if you please unmute your mic and answer the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think China has a leverage in the sense that China's policy has always been non-intrusive. So they would establish contacts. They have contacts with the Taliban since 2014. But at the same time, they have contacts with all the political groups in Afghanistan. And I don't think that any of the Afghan leaders would be naive to fall prey to the Indo-China, tussle and spoil their own prospects of cooperation. And I think they have been benefiting. They have been benefited to India as well as China, and I think they are not likely to take sides. In that respect, I think Afghanistan has a history. Even when we think that Afghan governments have been closer to India, but on Kashmir dispute, they have not taken sides. They have been neutral. So I think in this way, you have to give credit to successive Afghan governments, irrespective of the fact that who was ruling there, whether it was monarchy or communists or mujahideen, or for that matter, the present dispensation. So I think diplomatically, they have been quite suave and they have maintained a balance. Thank you.
Well, there is another question from Dr. Askri. He's asking that who would be the guarantor of peace in Afghanistan? Geneva Accord was also not implemented in its true spirit. Sir, Muhammad Ayaz, if you would like to answer the question, please unmute your mic.
Well, I think the simple, quick answer is that nobody can be a guarantor unless the Afghans themselves give this guarantee that we are not going to fight against each other. But, once, let's hope, once they come to an agreement and peace returns, then I think it's the moral obligations of the immediate neighbors to ensure that nothing happens from their soil to anything inside Afghanistan. Their soil should not be used against either by them or by any other element against the government in Afghanistan, and they should also extend their support. And more than that, I would say, that is my individual personal reaction to it, that Afghanistan has been destroyed mostly by the former Soviets, for which Russia is now responsible, and the US. They should ensure the guarantee and pay to the Afghans for the destructions that they have made. What to say of guaranteeing, not derailing the government, but ensuring the financial guarantee. And America has the capacity of providing security, but under US umbrella. Nobody's force, anybody's force, I mean any country's force inside Afghanistan would not be tolerated, would not be accepted. It can be if it comes to under the UN umbrella, not other than that. But as I said, the immediate neighbor can make contribution up to 90% of it.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like to request Shamshad Ahmed Khan Sahab again that there are two questions which are relevant with each other. So please, if you could answer these questions. One is from Arif Hussain. He's asking that what can be implications of a peace process for Pakistan brokered by India? And the other question that Maria is asking, she is a member of Islamabad Pak Afghan Youth Forum. She's asking that how Pakistan can counter Indian influence in Afghanistan. How will it affect us after peace deal? Can it be through investment or people-to-people contact? Sir.
Ijaz, before I comment on these two questions that you have mentioned, I like to add to what Ayaz has said on the question of guarantors of peace in Afghanistan. You know, there is no peace that can be left to the whims and whimsicalities of just neighboring countries, that few countries they undertake on themselves that they will abide by the terms of peace. Absolutely, that is just wishful thinking. So as far as a diplomat, what I believe is that we will eventually need an international treaty under the auspices of the United Nations. In fact, if I were to decide, I would have started this process immediately in continuation of the Geneva Accords, that the Secretary General should have brokered peace in Afghanistan through proper process on the same lines as was after 30 years of war in Europe, peace brokered in Europe in terms of the Congress of Vienna. So, of course, the situation is different in both cases, but Afghanistan and Switzerland have many similarities in terms of ethnic, linguistic diversities and many other mountainous regions. So it would have been ideal if we could have, in the year 2015, we had finalized some kind of international treaty on the lines of Congress of Vienna, which had guaranteed Switzerland's permanent neutrality. So what I envisage, I would like to see an international treaty that guarantees Afghanistan's permanent neutrality, and that guarantees non-interference in internal affairs of Afghanistan, that guarantees that Afghan soil will not be used against the interests of third countries. So these are all factors that will have to be addressed through a proper channel. It cannot be left to the Afghans alone. Well, they have not been able to decide their own future for the last 70, 80 or 40 years. So we can't leave these things to their whims. So eventually we have to go up to the United Nations and have a treaty, international treaty. Just there was an attempt in the year 2002. I think 6 countries, neighboring countries of Afghanistan had signed an agreement, but it didn't work because just neighboring countries joining together, it means nothing. It will have to have the stamps of the United Nations. So that would guarantee. About India's role, well, India has basically no relevance to Afghan peace, I would say, other than that it has a spoiler's role. Because only because Afghanistan has a historic links with India, that doesn't mean that India has to play the role of Afghanistan's neighbors, which share borders with Afghanistan. So in that sense, I don't think India can claim or has any stakes for brokering peace in Afghanistan. Once we have peace established by the Afghans themselves, India will have no opportunity to interfere. Of course, India has been interfering even in our internal affairs, so that India will continue, but the Afghans, I'm sure, will be courageous enough to withstand any pressures from India or any other part for that matter. So about India's economic clout also, India has its first to take care of its own economic problems, because in the region, if there is any country which is the most isolated country, it is India. Because India has no land routes linkages to any direction. It has only sea outlet. Otherwise, it has to go to Afghanistan through Pakistan. It has to go to Central Asia, Pakistan. It has to go to Middle East through Pakistan. So India, talking that India will play any role in Afghanistan's economic transformation, forget. It is China and Pakistan which eventually will be playing that transformative role in Afghanistan's future. Of course, needless to say that United States, China, and Russia will have to continue to support this process by generating investments in Afghanistan and all those things that could have been and should have been done in the late 80s and 90s will have to be done now in terms of reconstruction, rehabilitation of Afghan system. First, the Afghans have to identify what kind of system they have, then it will have to be put in place through sustained efforts and help from the major powers as well as the regional countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. All four guest speakers enlightened us with their thoughts. I can derive from the talk that Afghan peace process is a case of political wisdom as well as political vigilance for the all stakeholders in Afghanistan. Only prospect of Afghan peace, what I could understand out of this talk, that it is a non-intervention of external perpetrators. And just as Pakistan played a key role in the 4 decades of the Afghan crisis, the country has a very influential and decisive role in facilitating peace. So I don't think so there is any peace process possible without going through or seeing through the lens of Islamabad. At the end, I again thank to the guest speakers as well as our august audience for being patient during the whole webinar. And we will keep inviting you all for more enlightening topics. And until then, goodbye from the Center for Peace and Security Research. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you.